This podcast is supported by World of Learning Conference and Exhibition. L&D professionals, you need to be at World of Learning, the leading L&D event happening this 7th and 8th of October at the NEC Birmingham, UK. An unrivaled opportunity to learn, discover, interact and network. Register for free today at learnevents.com. This podcast is supported by Synthesia. Training videos shouldn't take weeks to make. Synthesia lets you turn text into professional, multilingual training videos in minutes. It's fast, scalable, and so simple anyone can use it. You can write an email, you can make a video.
Hey there, my name is Alex, and I'll be guiding you through this training session.
70% of Fortune 100 companies use Synthesia to modernize onboarding, simplify compliance, and scale global training. Podcast listeners get an exclusive 30-day free trial. Go to synthesia.io/greatminds. Don't miss it. This offer won't last.
We're entering into a period where we're having to redefine the coalition between humans and machines. And any AI, generative AI orientated redesign of work has to be human-centric in that regard.
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
Hi there, humans. This episode is about productivity. Not the old Taylorist model of productivity, where humans alone are treated as resources to be developed and managed, but a new vision, one shaped by AI, skills, and a coalition between humans and machines. As AI tools spread throughout every industry, the big question becomes, how do we make them a force for value creation and human potential? Not just an opportunity for cost-cutting. To help unpack this challenge, I spoke to Brian Murphy.
Hack Facts.
Brian Murphy is Global Head of Learning and Development at NTT DATA. In this role, he leads the strategy and execution of learning and capability programs on a global scale, helping employees and clients adapt to rapid change and amplify productivity through skills, culture, and technology. Before joining NTT DATA, Brian was at Microsoft, where he drove career development, skills-based transformation, and learning culture across large global teams. He has also held senior L&D and leadership roles at AstraZeneca and Citi.
There are moments in podcasting when you find yourself repeatedly checking the record status to make sure the machine is still running because you know that what you're capturing is gold. There were several such moments for me in this interview with Brian. The challenge of redesigning work around AI is a central one for our time, and a critical priority as Brian sees it is that we retain human capability at the centre of organisational transformation. Not replacement, but a well-defined coalition, with the humans firmly in charge. So hi Brian, great to have you on the podcast at last, and welcome to The Learning Hack.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. I know it's long overdue. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, so I'm really pleased we can chat today.
Our paths first crossed when I was hosting a thought leadership dinner. I think it was for Lumes. And you may well have been at Citi at that point.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember thinking afterwards, God, that was really interesting, because sometimes, to be absolutely honest, I've done a lot of those thought leadership dinners, and you give people a good dinner, and then sometimes people just kind of like blather on in a very self-important way and don't say very much. But you had made really interesting points. And when kind of a few months later, I stopped working for Lumes and started out as an independent consultant. And people assumed I was going to start a podcast. So I did start a podcast. And they said, well, what sort of people are you going to have on there? I said, people like Brian Murphy. So that's like 5 years ago. But here you are now. So let's get into it. I want to talk mostly about AI and productivity, which again we were going to talk about earlier in the year, an Iventive event, but that got postponed for various reasons. But with such an interesting past CV, your recent change of job from Microsoft to NTT Data, it's really good to fill that out with reflections on different industries you worked in, like tech, pharma, and finance. So from your vantage point at NTT Data now, what do you see as the biggest challenges organizations face when redesigning work around AI? Challenge that people in a lot of sectors now are having to cope with. And how might these differ from what you saw within Microsoft and so on?
Yeah, it's. I think you're just going straight to the heart of the biggest challenge that we're collectively facing, really. And so, yeah, look, great to be here. Thank you for this first question. Um, I've been doing obviously a lot of thinking about this recently. I've just started a new job, as you mentioned, with NTT Data. So we're thinking deeply about our learning and development strategy, our skills strategy, also for the organization, which is great. But ultimately, the sands are shifting below our feet in the sense that, as you've sort of intimated, the nature of work itself is changing, and the coalition, really, we're entering into a period where we're having to redefine the coalition between humans and machines in that regard. It's as fundamental as that. And so, as we're considering that, and in all industries and all organizations, because nobody is immune from this, I think we start to have to really consider and reflect on the fundamentals of that coalition and the role of humans, obviously, within that. And any AI, generative AI, or orientated redesign of work has to be human-centric in that regard. But as part of that, then really reassessing the role that humans will play, machines will play, in whatever guises we want to talk about agents and whatnot. Sure, we'll get onto all of that. Um, but as you start to consider that, you then have to also start to unpick the very fabric of what organizations are, not to get too meta about it, but what the fundamentals of what organizations are. Organizations essentially are collections of people brought together around a common purpose. And I do think that, I've worked, as you said, been around far too long, but I've worked in, different industries with very large, complex organizations. And, one of the biggest challenges is that most organizations who have been around for some time are still organized under a Taylorist construct, whereby, there's a fairly hierarchical construct. People are seen as resources. You have this phrase of human resources, and the idea is to arrange and allocate those resources in the most productive and efficient way in order to meet customer needs or patient needs, or whatever it might be. And I think that for many years, many people who have been doing organization development and organization design have been attempting to rewrite the social construct or contract between employees and organizations, because it's not really fit for purpose. And now, with the advent of generative AI and our need to really rethink that coalition that I mentioned, I think that's just now being brought into really stark. It's really clear that the fabric of that is not fit for purpose. So we have a real need, a real opportunity to rethink the role of humans, and create human-centric organizations where we are playing to our strengths as humans, and we're able to really take a step back and think about the fundamentals of what it takes to bring people together for a common goal, and not to be too melodramatic or sort of down on things on a Friday morning here. I do also see, though, at the very time when we need to be quite progressive around thinking about these things because of the need to lean into our innate human capabilities as part of that coalition. I am starting to see organizations maybe going even a little bit backwards. If you think about post-pandemic and the move to sort of return to work, a lot of companies, so in my belief, sort of over-indexing in terms of how they're forcing or sort of micromanaging people to be in certain places and work in certain ways, as well as other practices like I see some organizations bringing back forced performance ratings or rankings. This is stuff went
Yeah.
out 20 years ago. So it's curious to me, not to get too broad at the outset here, but it's curious that in service of your question, the answer seems to be that we continue to sort of double down on the human element of organizations. We rethink the tasks and the work design in the new construct, and we really double down on that human element. And yet, we are seeing some organizations perhaps not necessarily move in that direction. And I understand, margin is tough. It's a tough environment
Yeah.
for business. But I just wonder whether in the long arc that there's an opportunity that some organizations will sort of lean into this challenge, and despite the short-term headwinds, will sort of try and really be progressive in how they think about AI and human transformation. I use those two phrases intentionally together.
Yeah.
Whereas others may not, and so we live in interesting times, John. Sorry, that was a bit of a wandering answer to your question, but it does sort of go to the heart of
Yeah.
the future of work.
Zeroing in on one of the issues there, we do find a lot of businesses thinking about AI as being a magic bullet for productivity.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we make sure they don't just make it about headcount reductions? Which
Yeah.
there is some evidence that we're seeing that. I mean, it's not entirely clear. Martin Sorrell, ex of WPP, was on the radio this morning saying that he thinks it's more about the fact that everybody's economies are suffering at the moment. But there are indications, certainly from West Coast of America, that headcounts are getting reduced, and we hear it with kind of first jobbers are suffering as the graduates come into the market. How do we prevent it just being seen as a way of the CFO cutting the headcount?
I think there's two things. One is I think there's definitely a pull through from our first exchange, because the levers that we pull as CEOs or leading organizations are pretty rudimentary if you think about it, right? I mean, it's need to reduce cost. Really, you reduce costs, or you increase revenue, increase your value realization on the other side, and far too often, the short-term pressures in organizations is to reduce cost. And therefore AI, yes, there are absolutely productivity gains, but also cost efficiencies as a result of AI. I do think we are in the early stages of this, and I think that we tend to, as humans, we tend to default to what we know. And I do wonder, to your question, whether we're sort of CFOs and others are reacting to and pulling the levers that they know and using AI to accelerate that. I happen to think, when I was at Microsoft, you could see how we were going to market with Copilot, and a lot of that was around efficiency and making us more efficiency and taking the drudgery out of our day to day, so we can spend more time on what we as humans are built for, as it were. And I totally continue to sign up to that argument. However, I think we're also missing the other side of the argument, which is using AI to increase value and to increase not just productivity, but also value realization and value streams for customers, patients, whatever industry you're in. And I don't think we're just at the early sort of stage of this. And I don't think we've sort of seen that value realization being pulled through. And of course, that's because use cases for AI are so varied, and some of them are accelerating rapidly and really transforming, creating whole new industries, never mind transforming existing ones. But it is fairly lumpy, and it is, it's not consistent. And there's, again, you're trying to apply this amazing new technology to often fairly traditional value chains and so on. So I think I think we have to see the opportunity both in terms of efficiency, sure, but efficiency not just cost cutting, more around how can we free up people to be able to reinvest their time and energy in work that is of higher value and can improve upside rather than simply just here's an opportunity for a quick kind of cost efficiency that will help us meet an existing target. I think that's kind of missing
Yeah.
and underselling the potential of the tech. But at the same time, if you're a CFO and you're sitting in a chair and you've got a quarterly reporting that needs to go to the market, this is a sort of harsh reality that is particularly in some industries where margins are really under threat at the moment. So yeah, I think we're at early stages, and I think adoption is so varied that I would hope that as we become more familiar and understand the use cases of the technology, we're able to see focus as much, if not more, on value realization rather than efficiency.
Yeah. So you're right. We're in an exploratory phase. People say we have a big capability overhang in that the technology can do a lot more than people can actually do themselves with it. And, I suffer from that myself. I could do my podcast a lot quicker if I could take a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months off and learn a whole load of new tools that come out almost weekly to do that. But you brought up an interesting kind of thing about, there is this trade-off with new availabilities with AI and friction. I mean, this comes out with Copilot. I was at an event yesterday watching presentations about Copilot, and people were kind of whispering in the background that, well, I wish the thing would stop interrupting me and asking me if I want to summarize this. And then I asked it to do something else, and it can't do that. The last kind of load of technology advances that were going to give us productivity increases, with the web, sort of did, and then in other ways sort of didn't. We've ended up with an awful lot of form filling, an awful lot of friction. So balancing that thing of wow, this thing just saved me 2 hours in getting this document out, against this thing interrupts me every 5 minutes and it's actually slowing me down. That is less the preserve of CFOs, but may well be the preserve of HR leaders and L&D people. What should those people be doing now to make sure AI is a force for both human potential and business success?
Yeah, I think I think there's areas that we need to lean into as HR and learning and talent leaders that perhaps we haven't so much in the past. So, uh, I think we have a great opportunity to work with CIOs, chief information officers, CTOs, um, and other C-suite leaders, so that we can really help with work redesign and work transformation. Because not only do we have to improve baseline understanding of how to use these tools, to your example, and to really start thinking about use cases through personas, and because that ultimately is where this comes to life, right? Is yes, you could have a great AI assistant, but how do you put it to work, and where's sort of examples of best use cases for your particular type of work? So that's sort of, I think that's, and many people are doing that quite well, and I think that work needs to accelerate, because I think part of this is sort of fear of the technology rather than and that's what can hold back adoption. I mean, at the end of the day, people are going to take their device and be using this anyway. So I think it sort of reminds me, showing my age now, but it reminds me of when the internet and working remotely sort of came in first. And there's all this sort of reticence around giving people access and so on. And of course, people are just starting to use it anyway.
Yeah.
So I think we have to help the organization. And that's, you can look at early adopter groups, and there's different ways of doing that. So that's sort of change, right? And I think we need to lean into that. But I think the work redesign, I think, is very important as well, because if we have great technology, it's only as good as how the use case. And often that won't just be layering it. It can be, and layering it on top of and using it for existing work patterns. But often it's going to require us to rethink actual work design and think about, okay, well, there's a whole bunch of jobs that to a lesser or greater extent will need to be re-engineered, and work will have to be re-engineered. And you mentioned, that I think other guests have been talking about having uh, multidisciplinary teams where you've literally got AI agents as full team
Yes.
members, right?
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
got this hybrid teams. So I think this is for HR leaders our opportunity to really lean into the space, because it's never been more important for us to be really thoughtful around work redesign and looking at task analysis and coming up with strategies that can be both top down and bottom up around that. What do I mean? I mean, at Microsoft, we were starting to look at this where we were working with third parties and our own engineers to figure out how could we do do task analysis around different types of jobs, which we knew were going to require us to rethink as a result of AI.
Mhm.
And some of that you can do as you would standardly do in terms of looking at different areas. But the other one is to equip managers and line managers and employees with the tools to also continuously reevaluate and reassess and redesign the work at a more micro level and a team-based level. So that's something which I think not typically at what traditionally L&D would be doing, but I think
Yeah.
really we do need to reorientate and re-engineer what we do to be in service of this, because there's a gap in the market for that, right, in organizations, and it's badly needed. And that's something I've written about recently,
Yeah.
and I know it's emergent, but I think it's incumbent on us to lean in and start to do it. And there's great technologies and tools to help with that evaluation and that assessment,
Yeah.
because you can't decide and design great learning experiences unless we're much clearer around what will be the learning that's required. And in order to that, you have to first understand how work is going to be changed. So it's more like looking at that upstream, um, and getting involved more upstream in terms of what that will be. Otherwise, we're going to be on the back foot, and other people will be making those decisions. And
Yeah.
I'm not convinced they would necessarily be best placed to do that.
If you're looking to connect with the top minds in learning and talent, there's no better place than an iVentive event. That's IVENTIV. Since 2009, they've hosted nearly 300 interactive conversational events exclusively for senior leaders like global heads of learning. I've been a sponsor myself and found these events invaluable. Less about sitting and listening, more about real, impactful conversations. It's an unmatched opportunity to collaborate with leading chief learning officers on the challenges they're tackling today. Join the conversation. Visit iventive.com/learninghack. That's iventive.com/learninghack.
Yeah. Laurie Nels Hoffman, who we had on the podcast recently, she's the person you were talking about, really. She mentioned all that. And she says that, broadly speaking, I don't want to put words in her mouth, that L&D has to become system designers. That system design is going to be a big part of what you do and thinking through. That's not part of the traditional roles, really, or the skill set. It's that. How do you feel that transition should be made in terms of the profession?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Laurie on that. I think that for many years, many of us have been talking about bringing in a more stronger performance consulting, data-led approach to learning and development, and really leading with that as our main value proposition. So really understanding performance gaps, root cause analysis, and the solution. We should be much more agnostic about solutions. I think in a way it's sort of an evolution or an extension of that, in the sense that, well, can we just push that consulting kind of capability a step further, where we're starting to help with work design and as Laurie says, thinking about system development. And so it's going to require, though, even if you've been leading teams that have been quite progressive in that regard, it's still going to require a reskilling and to repositioning of the function to do that. If you have a very traditional approach, even more so. But I think it's necessary because if we don't, two things. One, you know, that work has to get done. So I worry if it isn't going to be the talent and people, function, then blimey, who's best placed to do that?
Yeah.
And second of all, if you have if we think about the value proposition that for learning and development in the future, especially, and we may get onto this in terms of really people are increasingly going to be equipped with fantastic personalized work and learning solutions because
Mhm.
that's how the market is evolving and not before time. So what is our role? What is our work? And it seems to me that there's a sort of there's a danger that if we don't step into that space, as Larry is suggesting,
Mm.
not only do we miss a big opportunity, we also run the risk of becoming quite increasingly irrelevant. So yeah, it's I think it's not to over egg the pudding, but I think it's as fundamental and as important as that.
Yes. Interesting. A part of that as well is you've argued in the past we need to move away from traditional job roles and start thinking in terms of skills, and you're certainly not alone in that, and that is a kind of very prevalent kind of question that's being asked, and a lot of people are quibbling about the way that we define skills and so on. I don't mean to sort of make those arguments sound unimportant by the use of the word quibble, but there's a debate.
Yeah.
What do you feel are the most important skills for thriving in an AI-enabled services environment, particularly, and what are the key things that companies need to have in place to make a skills-based learning approach
Yeah.
work?
Well, first of all, I'm still a card-carrying member of the, we should move organizations to a skills-based approach. I
Good.
know that,
Glad
to
to
your
hear it.
point, that I know that's been, um, there's been a lot of criticism or reevaluation of whether that's still the right approach, because I think in the past few years, that many have tried, and there's a few people like Peter Shepard Erickson and a few other people who have I know ASI also at LSEG who have done, who have actually converted on this and actually shown how a number of elements can be done. But for
Mhm.
the vast majority, it's been a real struggle because either the technology hasn't been mature enough in order to enable that skills and seamless skills intelligence,
Yeah.
um, and I should say the key thing to enabling a skills sorry, I'll answer your other part of your question in a second in terms of what
Yeah.
skills, but in terms of enabling a skills-based organization, you have to also re reevaluate how you run your organization through a skills lens, which is much more fundamental, and often that's where this approach can fall down. So I don't think a skills-based strategy is wrong. I think it's failed up to now because of the lack of skills intelligence due to the technology sort of holding us back. And fundamentally, if you are um, to move into that space, you have to fundamentally revisit how you make organizational decisions
Mm.
through a skills lens. And that's right back to the start of our conversation today, which is how organizations are organized in terms and how decisions are made. In
Yeah.
terms of your question about which skills, you know, it obviously depends on. There's so many variables in terms of the organizations that and different industries that we're in.
Mm.
We we're obviously an IT services company with NTT Data, and we're continuing to sort of evolve how we support our customers across that full stack. And so technical, proficiency and technical capabilities continues to be so critical to a large number of our role personas. And that's something we'll continue to double down on. So you sort of think about this sort of in three buckets. You've got these technical capabilities which evolve rapidly, and that's a challenge in terms of continuing to keep pace with that and help people with that. You've got the baseline AI sort of and technical capabilities, like you and I were talking about, how are we using these tools in our day to day? And that's sort of
Yeah.
fairly role agnostic, but that's just increasing our AI sort of acumen. And the third one is are these human capabilities, which are, the hypothesis is that as this coalition between machines and humans continues to evolve, our role will and should be to play our part in that coalition, which is to bring our best to the party, as it were, which is our innate human capabilities, such as curiosity, such as empathy, learning to learn, and our agility and ability to be able to do that. Now, I think these have always been sort of meta skills, sort of force multipliers, as it were, in the
Yeah.
workplace. But increasingly, the thinking would be that this is really where we need to play. And it's also, if you also think about the rate of AI transformation that's happening, one other way of thinking about this is that at some point, the competitive advantage from that is going to be somewhat normalized. And that might be a ways away, but at some point you could see how that might happen. And therefore, where is the real competitive advantage? Well, it's with your human capital. And are you organizing that and deploying that human capital in ways that really leverages their innate capabilities and skills? And have you been laying the foundations for that? Because that takes time. So I think that it's a complex one in terms of what skills, if we move to a skills-based approach, how you look at that. But the last point I'll make on this is that I think if Laurie quite rightly is talking about multidisciplinary teams in terms of you have basically AI agents on your team, and they are forming part of your constituent workforce. I think we also need to be looking at a skills-based orientation and saying, well, which are the skills and the underlying tasks, obviously, behind that we're going to be using AI for, and that's that inventory, as it were, and ongoing evaluation and how here's something that kind of messes with my head, how we as learning and development, and this is Stefan Thoma's point of view, which I think is fascinating. As learning development, should we be involved in how the AI agents are trained and developed? Because
Yes.
that effectively is the other part of the workforce, and that gets us into a whole other space of our ability and capability and our orientation. So yeah, it's a complex one. I think I'm still a believer in a skills-based approach. We just need to be holistic around how we think about it, and probably back to unpicking the organizational sort of design and construct. That I think that's critical to doing this, because just getting a skills taxonomy and some great tech we've shown that's not going to be successful. So yeah, that's my best crack at that.
That debate about skills tends to go two ways. One of them very detailed, competencies didn't work, so what should skills? Do we have the taxonomies? Is empathy a skill or an attribute? And so on. So there's that detailed level. And at the other level, it ends in people saying, oh, well, I'm an organizational designer. I'm an OD person, really, rather than L&D person. And you hear that quite a bit from CLOs and so on nowadays. But what I'd like to zero in on there was you used the word train in terms of, do we need to train these agents? And just yesterday, I was editing a soundbite of Laurie Niles Hoffman's, where she was addressing exactly that point, and she's saying, we will need to train the agents. And I found that when I was putting the subtitling right, which you still have to do with AI because it's only about 80% right, I put that in inverted commas because I know that the tech heads I know, like Asha LPI would say, what, train? Are you really going to learn how to train AIs? Because that has a particular technical meaning. So when L&D people say train, it's a different, linguistics people would say it's a difference of register. It means something slightly different, I think. Am I right in that distinction?
Yes, it does. And I suppose maybe we could reframe it to say, And again, it's sort of reframing our role in this when it comes to thinking about how do we develop the skill so we have a better understanding of the skills we have. We need a better understanding of the skills we need in the future, and then in terms of how we bridge the gap, and it's our job to help bridge that gap, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
our work. And I think expanding our scope to consider that holistically and sort of take a step back and let go of perhaps of what we've done in the past and say, well, if that's the work, then how should we reorientate and rethink that? And if you're going to be helping organizations equip themselves and navigate this change, you have to consider both sides of the coalition. You can't just say, well, we're going to double down on the human piece, which of course we do, and that's going to be a massive competitive advantage, and that's really where a lot of the future lies. But we have to do that thoughtfully in terms of the skills and capabilities needed together. So it just pushes us into spaces that we're uncomfortable with, perhaps as traditional L&D. But but that's okay. I think that's it's the next chapter of the work, and we have to figure that out. One quick point though that I wanted to mention as you were asking me the last question.
Yeah.
The other point on the skills-based approach, for many years, I think many of us have been sort of advocating for this. And I've also been advocating for, a much more sort of adult learning approach to thinking about how we learn, right? And how we learn is, and we know this to be true. We learn is predominantly through experience, deep reflection and practice, as well as through our connections, right? Through the social learning,
Yeah.
and especially on these human capability pieces. And the opportunity or the promise is that we can build capabilities and skills, and I know I'm using those interchangeably, so forgive me.
Yeah.
But we can do that in ways because of in a much more holistic way. What I mean by that is traditionally you build a skill by somebody going on a training course or completing a certification, and that's still important, particularly for certain technical pieces. But the real opportunity is where we're using work data to be able to validate what skills and capabilities people are deploying and developing. And there's various different ways, cool ways you can do that using AI in terms of inference and so on. I think that is exciting because it addresses two barriers to entry, as it were, to move to this skills-based approach. One is having people going in and updating their skills profile. It's just never going to work, right? And no matter how easy you make it, you need to move to a point where that is seamless behind the scenes, and ultimately how you work in terms of your experiences and your connections. So this conversation can be codified using AI to infer what as part of a much bigger diagnostic, what skill or capability John and Brian are deploying through this conversation. It's the start. I think we're starting to turn the page and moving into an era where we'll be able to have real-time skills inventory validated and with the real work and informed in that way. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is how we learn, which is fundamentally much more diverse and much more varied than just training. And again, if you can codify work in a way that allows you to link that to how skills are deployed and developed through a multitude of experiences, not just formal learning, again, that gets us into a really interesting place where we're developing skills in a much more rapid and organic way rather than purely offline through a training intervention. So, sorry, I don't want to go on too much about that, but it's part of, these are broader topics that many of us have been trying to address for many years, and the skills-based approach and the use of generative AI around skills intelligence certainly offers us the opportunity to move in those directions.
Very interesting. And just to clarify one of those points for me, so you're saying that in this conversation, rather than just taking the transcript, feeding it into ChatGPT and saying generate show notes for me. What I could also say at that point is look at this transcript. I mean, not with ChatGPT as it currently is, but with an AI. Look at this transcript and tell me what skills are Brian and John exhibiting just now, and can you kind of list them, and how do they kind of link into other skills frameworks?
But you could also take that another stage even further, where you're not having to do that intervention yourself.
Yeah.
But that, to Laurie's point around system thinking, you can have your system set up, your work set up and designed in a way that is literally happening all the time in the background. And so,
Right.
not to go on about my previous employer, because there are many companies looking at this, but Microsoft Skills, Viva Skills, have been looking at being basically there's a module whereby, and it's still early, right? This is all early days, but the
Yeah.
really cool thing about this is that it will data scrape all of your 365 landscape, and it will be constantly assessing and inferring based on the connections you're making, the PowerPoint presentations you're working on, the presentations you're making, the Teams chats, emails, you name it, what potentially could be inferred to be some skills and proficiency levels based on that work, which would be one component, one input into an ongoing skills profile. Obviously, be other inputs, in terms of other data points. But what I really like about that, and this has to mature and it has to be tested and validated. But what I like about that is that I don't have to go in and update a skills profile. It literally is prompting me in the flow of my work to go, hey, we're inferring that we think you're reached a sort of 11.3 now on communication skills or influencing.
Yeah.
And obviously that has to be validated, and that's a whole other question in terms of how we do that. But the organic nature of this and the fact that it is happening real time, and we're starting to then incentivize and encourage people to think about their work through a skills lens, because the technology is enabling that seamlessly and in the flow. That has the potential. I don't want to get overly excited about it, but it has the potential to be a game changer and moving us into a space where we just couldn't be in the past, because it's like, you have to go into your workday profile and update your skills profile. Good luck in keeping that up to date, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's not just you using AI to extract and inform your skills, like you said. Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's absolutely, it's there now, but it's
But a
more.
stage beyond that.
It's a
Yeah.
stage beyond that, which is we're starting to have enterprise technology that can inform real time the
Yeah.
deployment and the development of skills in the flow of work. And that has the potential to just move into a different space and remove a lot of barriers to entry around this.
That's fantastically exciting. It's also fantastically scary. And not least for the CFOs who might potentially be tuning in. I think there's an outside chance. And we'll think, well, is this thing going to prompt people to say, is it going to come back with a response to people and say, I just noticed in that conversation, Brian, you are fantastically overqualified. I think you need to ask for a wage rise and maybe a move to, another organization or whatever. And of course, people will have worries about surveillance,
Yeah.
culture, and so on.
I think it's such an interesting topic, because at the end of the day, any of this has to be human-centric, and the ethics of this are hugely important.
Yeah.
And again, again, as part of the human resources or people and culture function, if you're in that function, I think, again, that's a great opportunity for us to be employee advocates and to be able to ensure that that's an important aspect of this. And I think that's a big part of our responsibility. But, the other thing that strikes me as you were talking there is, if you think about how we, whether it be finance or other members of the organization, have been making organizational decisions in the past, often it's very hard, and I've seen this coming into this organization. It's very hard to get your head around what inventory of skills do we have in the organization, right? Truly, what do we have in the organization? And often you have to use proxies for that, right? And the usual proxy is, well, we have 2,000 engineers sitting in this role type over here. Therefore, our assumption is that they have the following skills and capabilities. It's hugely, it's a huge proxy approach and very sort of underwhelming, because you're homogenizing 2,000 people into the same sort of category and saying, well, they all must have these skills, right?
Mm.
And it's really inefficient and ineffective. And
Yeah.
you're leaving a lot of capabilities off the table in that regard. So how we make organizational decisions have been in terms of deploying and that organizational agility, right? And we're
Mm.
leaving so much of that behind. So I think this is really important, particularly as the pace of change happens. And back to this point around this with AI transformation, we have to have a better handle on what are the skills and capabilities we have in the organization. How do we deploy and develop those more effectively? And having that skills intelligence, the business use case for that is huge right now. So yes, it's going to be tricky. All the things you mentioned in terms of the ethics around this, making sure that data integrity PI is we have to ensure that we navigate all of that. But I think we need to start, you know, breaking this down and running some future work experiments and
Yeah.
starting to, as we build the sort of the infrastructure and all that cool tech that we just talked about in terms of that skills intelligence, we need to start going after real use cases and start to demonstrate how this can work, because the risk and reward of this, like we're going to have to take some accommodate certain smart risks around this,
Mm.
but the benefits, it's up to us to be able to demonstrate how this can really transform how we make business decisions and transform employee experience for people as well. People are quite rightly demanding now about, well, I want to develop and be able to deploy my skills and capabilities in a much more agile way. I don't want to be working for one person. I want to work on multiple projects. I want to get exposure across different teams. Well, the way you do that is you matchmake and you connect people to those experiences, whether they be projects, full-time roles, mentors, coaches, you name it, through skills data and AI. So yeah, sorry, you got me going now in this, but I think it's important that we push the boundaries. Yeah, yeah.
Time is against us, so I have to respect your schedule. So I hope you'll come back for another one of these sessions in the new year.
I'd love
I
to,
really
yeah.
do, because there's obviously a lot to talk about. Lastly, who do you follow on AI and productivity? I mean, who's hot, who's not? And what's your karaoke go-to? Sorry, what's your karaoke go-to?
Oh, you can't ask me that. You can't ask me.
Yeah. Yeah, these we're recording on a Friday. I should say the podcasts go out on a Monday, so I try to end on a lighter note.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in the market for good recommendations around.
Yep.
I do enjoy podcast the modality for learning. I've got young kids. It's hard for me to. Although I love reading, it's just hard for me to find time. And
Yeah.
if you're traveling and so on, there's certain go-to podcasts, not least of all this one, but
Thank
also Curious Advantage and Simon Sinek's
Yep.
podcast. There's the usual ones I'm sure many people listen to, but I am in the market for some new ones, particularly as when you start a new job, you have a natural, I think I try and use it as a forcing function to reset around, how I'm informing myself.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity, John, for us to, I spoke about this recently on a different podcast. There's an opportunity for us to expose ourselves to different domains in order to learn about transferable approaches that we can use. Because, as we mentioned during this conversation, so much of this hasn't been written. We're breaking so much new ground. And I think there's an opportunity for us to learn how other professions and other industries are navigating change and what are their techniques and approaches. That's why I've always tended to bring in people with marketing skills into the L&D function, or
Yeah.
people with deep data and analytics expertise who can really interrogate the problems with data. And so I'm very interested in adjacencies and how we do that. So as we think about, that's why I tend to sort of think about when I'm reading and listening to people and different leaders in different industries. I think that's an opportunity. Karaoke, oh man, I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that one. I'm in Dublin today. I live in the UK, but I'm back home in Dublin. So maybe it would be maybe it'd have to be a U2 song or something like that. So I'll have to go away and think about that, John. But yeah.
Ah, well, in the name of love, I've already spoken about my antipathy on this to you two on this podcast, I'm afraid. But of course, The Edge, what a great guitarist.
Yeah, amazing. And they seem to be pretty ageless.
Yeah.
So yeah, but obviously I'm biased, but that's okay.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Brian. I'll let you go. That's been absolutely brilliant. I think I really enjoyed that. Thanks a lot, and do come back.
Likewise. Thanks, John.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. It is produced by John Helmer and hosted by him and also me, Mariana, a Synthesia AI avatar. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Until next time, stay curious, learning people.
Now I finally get it.
The Learning Hack podcast is supported by Learning News, the learning sector's newswire. Rob and his team are good friends of the podcast, and we really value the help and advice we've had from them, and they do a great job. For the very latest news from around the learning sector, for interviews with learning leaders, the latest from learning sector vendors and features on workplace learning, go to learningnews.com.